Queen Elizabeth I may have been a virgin, but what most people don't know is that she was one of the most brutally cutthroat and significant rulers England has ever seen. A badass to some, a merciless imperialist to others, it's clear that our girl Liz stands out among the storied lineage of English monarchy. Today we're exploring why Elizabeth I was the most hardcore ruler England has ever seen. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. Oh, and that's just not enough. Leave a comment and let us know what historical royalty you would like to hear about. Okay, it's time to do a deep dive on England's Virgin Queen, Elizabeth I. The England that Elizabeth inherited in 1558 was not exactly picture perfect. Her dad, Henry VIII, had done what no other monarch had done before him. He expanded the monarchy by breaking up with the Catholic Church and making England a Protestant country. And let's just say, it wasn't an easy breakup. That religious rupture with Europe had profound effects and led to conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. England was a mess, torn apart by instability and in desperate need of a hashtag imperialist Navy-obsessed girl boss who wouldn't suffer fools. So after her father's death, Elizabeth took the throne as a young woman who was never supposed to be queen. She may not have looked it, but she was up to the task. Elizabeth wasn't a big dater. In fact, she was turned off by the whole marriage thing after the disastrous marriage politics of her father and older half-sister, Queen Mary I. Elizabeth's dad went through 6 wives over the course of his royal career, and Mary's marriage to a Spanish king inspired passionate outrage by her English subjects. Talk about drama. Furthermore, Elizabeth's situation was delicate. As a woman, she risked losing her independence, since she already had plenty of people who doubted her capacity to rule. Marrying a foreign prince was a dance in foreign policy. Marrying a subject was a dance in domestic policy. And also, dating is hard in general. Can you imagine how much harder it would be if you were a literal queen? Instead of getting hitched, Elizabeth branded herself as a virgin queen, and famously quipped, "I will have here but one mistress, and no master." Even though many believed it was against the laws of nature for a woman to rule, Elizabeth proved them all wrong. By not marrying, she was able to preserve English autonomy and minimize factionalism amongst the English nobility. Or maybe she just wasn't a big fan of royal weddings. Either way, being single and ready to mingle served Elizabeth as well as England. Elizabeth was never really supposed to succeed the throne. She was her father's second daughter, officially at least. Though she was born legitimate in 1533, her standing in the royal family quickly changed when her mother, Anne Boleyn, fell from grace and was beheaded in 1536. Since her mom was executed, that made Elizabeth become illegitimate and thus unlikely to ever succeed the throne. Most thought she wouldn't become queen ever, especially after her father had a son in 1537. Henry VIII's line of succession kept growing, pushing his red-haired, illegitimate daughter further and further down the line. But in a strange twist of fate, Liz's younger brother died in 1553. Suddenly, the crown passed to her sister Mary, causing Elizabeth to move up the food chain. When Mary married Philip of Spain, no kids were born. Because she had no children, Mary named her younger half-sister as her heir. So when Elizabeth finally became queen in 1558, she succeeded because she was the last heiress of Henry VIII standing. It was a real slow and steady wins the crown situation. Hell hath no fury like an angry queen. As queen, Elizabeth expected that her courtiers should show her respect. But her well-known vanity often made it difficult for would-be spouses to wed under Elizabeth's watchful eye. Several of her ladies-in-waiting, Bess Throckmorton and Catherine Grey, most notably, earned the Queen's scorn when they secretly married their lovers without the Queen's knowledge or permission. In fact, when Mary Shelton, the Queen's second cousin, secretly married John Scudamore without the Queen's permission, she suffered a broken finger when Elizabeth smacked her hand with her hairbrush. Yep, you heard that right. Queen Elizabeth I was a hairbrush-smacking control freak who controlled all her friends' marriages. Very normal stuff. Men were just as likely to get on the royal list as women. Explorer Sir Walter Raleigh fell in and out of favor with Elizabeth. Dashing and headstrong courtier Robert Devereux, Lord Essex, tried her patience and flouted her commands so incessantly and treasonously that he ultimately lost his head. Whoopsie! The England that Elizabeth ruled was a golden age of the arts, exploration, and, weirdly, piracy. England's chief naval rival was Spain, and English privateers stole buckets of goods and money from Spanish ships traveling to and from the Americas. Spain complained bitterly that English so-called privateers ransacked their ships, but Elizabeth did nothing to curb the exploits of men like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake. In fact, she rewarded piracy. Elizabeth may have been vain, but she was also the perfect combo of beauty and brains. Full of energy, she proved to be a queen who liked activity and educational study in equal measures. She was extremely educated and well-read. She was fluent in no less than 6 languages other than her native English: Latin, French, Greek, Spanish, Italian, and Welsh. She was extremely educated and well-read. Not just a bookworm, Liz the Virgin was also an unapologetic jock. She was an avid hunter and horsewoman, and her court was famous for dancing the night away. She was, in fact, the dancing queen. If you had an entire country's wealth at your disposal, you'd probably want someone around to read your astrology chart whenever you wanted, right? Well, that's what Elizabeth did when she was queen. One of Elizabeth's most trusted advisors was actually someone who believed in alchemy and astrology. John Dee, or Dr. Dee as he was called, was one of the most respected men of science in the Elizabethan world. He was a mathematician, a scientist, an alchemist, and an astrologer whose counsel Elizabeth routinely sought. In fact, Dee encouraged Elizabeth's imperial politics and was steadfast in his belief that the future of England was in North America. Sounds like a total Scorpio if you ask me. Dee wasn't just a man of astrology and science, he was also kind of a goth kid. His particular interest in the occult brought interesting characters into his life. For years, Dee turned to Edward Kelly for his own spiritual guidance. Edward Kelly, of course, was known to have secret occult knowledge and claimed that he could communicate with angels. Also, fun fact, Dee was probably the real-life inspiration for the character of Prospero in William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Just because you're known as a virgin doesn't mean you have to actually abstain from sex, right? Indeed, throughout her reign, Elizabeth hooked up with a list of royal-adjacent faves. Most notably was Robert Dudley, the Earl of Essex, who was a companion and advisor to the Queen for several decades. Some scholars even believe that Dudley was actually the love of her life. Elizabeth was a known appreciator of male beauty and maintained flirtations with the Duke of Anjou, a prospective husband, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Thomas Heneage. As she aged, she made no effort to tone down her flirting. Towards the end of her reign, the young Robert Devereux, stepson to her former favorite Robert Dudley, rose quickly in her favor, despite the fact he was 33 years younger than the Queen. Someone get a tracking device because this cougar is on the hunt. Meow. Rob flirted his way into royal appointments, and their relationship sent tongues wagging at court. He was as vain as he was handsome, however, and his star fell as quickly as it rose. Sadly, their relationship ended after he led a rebellion against Gloriana. Elizabeth broke things off with him by having his head separate from the rest of his body. As a teen, Elizabeth spent part of her time with her widowed stepmother, Catherine Parr, who had been her father's 6th and final wife. After the death of her royal husband, Parr had married Thomas Seymour in 1547, and Seymour moved in with his new wife and her 14-year-old stepdaughter. Anyway, Liz's new pseudo-stepdad started being really creepy. He harassed the poor teen by tickling her and accidentally walking in when she was nude. This caused quite a stir. Catherine caught on to this scandal quickly and gave it the kibosh. Furious, Catherine sent Elizabeth away in a bid to separate them. Tabloid-esque rumors followed the young princess, suggesting that she was pregnant with Seymour's child. The rumors, however, weren't true. But some speculate that her predatory stepfather relationship is what turned her off to future relationships with men. In 1554, Elizabeth's sister Mary, who was the Queen of England at the time, became deeply suspicious of her younger sister. In the wake of Wyatt's rebellion, Mary feared Elizabeth could potentially usurp the throne. As a result, Mary imprisoned her sister in the Tower of London for several months in the spring of 1554. Elizabeth toiled away in that tower, locked up and miserable for months. The guilt of imprisoning Elizabeth must have eaten away at Mary because, eventually, she did name Elizabeth as her only heir days before her death 4 years later. The Elizabethan era is known as a golden age in English history, a time when the literary arts popped off. This is largely due to the fact that England was relatively peaceful throughout Elizabeth's reign. Due to peace throughout the land, this guy named Shakespeare was able to try out a few plays, and this other guy, Sir Edmund Spenser, tried his hand at poetry. Elizabeth also cultivated a literary court, and many of her courtiers were themselves poets, like Sir Philip Sidney and Thomas Sackville. Since Elizabeth ascended to the throne in the most unlikely of circumstances, it was natural she felt a little paranoid about her power. Intelligence was thus important to her security, and so she kept a spy master around, Sir Francis Walsingham. Walsingham was an ardent Protestant, and much of his intelligence was meant to limit the influence of Catholic Spain, and he had spies placed throughout the country. Walsingham also worked with his agents to code and decode letters, a true 16th century James Bond. The Babington Plot in 1586 was an attempt to assassinate Elizabeth I and intended to replace her with her Catholic cousin Mary, the exiled Queen of Scotland, aka Mary Queen of Scots. The Babington Plot was intended to allow Spanish forces to invade England. The plot, hatched by its namesake Anthony Babington and John Ballard, was as brazen as it was treasonous. Elizabeth's spymaster Francis Walsingham used his master spy skills and uncovered the plot, thwarting it completely. This did, however, lead to the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was lured into the plot by Walsingham himself, who, in double agent style, lured her into the arrangement so he could gain evidence she was a tangible threat to Elizabeth's throne. Sneaky. Love her or hate her, it's clear that Queen Elizabeth I's reign of England restored the chaotic, turmoil-filled nation to powerful empire status. Between her navy building and arts encouraging, it's clear that Liz has forever cemented her place in history as one of the most memorable and hardcore queens of all time. What do you think of Queen Elizabeth I? Great leader or a bit too hardcore? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.